My name is Eleanor. I'm 36, and I never expected my parents' funeral to be the day that would change everything. Standing beside my sister Catherine as she whispered demands about our inheritance, I couldn't have imagined how the reading of my parents' will would silence her forever, or reveal the truth they had kept hidden from us our entire lives. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rain pattered against the stained glass windows of Westbrook Chapel, creating a melancholic soundtrack to match the somber occasion. The modest church was filled beyond capacity, a testament to the impact my parents had made in our small community of Millfield. People from every corner of our lives had gathered. My father's colleagues from the university where he had taught literature for 30 years, my mother's fellow volunteers from the community center, neighbors who had watched us grow up, and family members who had traveled from across the country. I sat in the front row, my black dress smoothed carefully over my knees, staring at the twin mahogany caskets adorned with simple white lily arrangements. The car accident had been sudden, a rainy night, a sharp turn, a driver who crossed the center line. Both gone in an instant, without goodbyes or final words of wisdom. The joint funeral seemed fitting for a couple who had spent 42 years together, rarely separated, even for a day. Catherine sat beside me, her designer heels tapping impatiently against the wooden floor. Despite the gravity of the occasion, she had managed to make her grief look glamorous, her black Prada dress and perfectly applied makeup creating an image of elegant sorrow. Every few minutes, she would dab at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, ensuring her public display of emotion remained intact while the expensive mascara stayed in place. Our relationship had always been complicated. 7 years my junior, Catherine had been the golden child from the moment of her birth, beautiful, charming, and remarkably skilled at getting what she wanted. Where I had inherited my father's scholarly nature and my mother's practical approach to life, Catherine had developed a talent for performance and persuasion. By 18, she had left our small town for Los Angeles with dreams of becoming an actress. The reality had been less glamorous, small roles in commercials, a few lines in forgettable TV episodes, and an Instagram following that provided more validation than her actual career. I had stayed in Millfield, building a life that looked unimpressive from the outside but felt meaningful to me. After graduating with a degree in library science, I had worked at the university library for several years before accepting a position as the town's head librarian. I had renovated my grandparents' old cottage, cultivated a garden that supplied most of my produce, and built deep friendships with people who had known me my entire life. Catherine often referred to my existence as painfully provincial, a description I had come to embrace rather than resent. Now, as Pastor Williams concluded his eulogy with a quote from my father's favorite poem, I felt Catherine's manicured hand grip my arm. "When is the lawyer coming?" she whispered, her voice carrying more impatience than grief. Morris said, "He'd be here right after the service." "Mr. Harrington," I corrected gently. "And yes, he'll meet us at the house once everyone has paid their respects." She nodded, seeming satisfied, and returned to her performance of The Devastated Daughter as the final hymn began. I sang along quietly, the familiar words providing more comfort than I had expected. As the service concluded and people began approaching to offer condolences, I noticed Catherine checking her watch repeatedly, her attention clearly elsewhere. The receiving line seemed endless, each person with a story, a memory, or simply a warm embrace. Professor Jenkins, my father's department chair, pressed my hand between his weathered palms and spoke of Dad's brilliance in the classroom. Mrs. Abernathy from the community garden detailed how my mother had transformed the neighborhood with her tireless volunteer work. Each interaction filled in another piece of the mosaic that had been my parents' lives, revealing dimensions I hadn't fully appreciated while they were alive. Catherine, meanwhile, performed her role with practiced precision, accepting condolences, with the perfect balance of gratitude and visible heartbreak. But whenever the conversation shifted away from her, I noticed her attention wandering, her eyes scanning the crowd as if looking for someone more important. "Eleanor, darling," came a familiar voice, pulling me from my observations. Aunt Margaret, my mother's older sister, wrapped me in a lavender-scented embrace. "How are you holding up?" "I'm okay," I said, surprised to find it wasn't entirely a lie. The grief came in waves, moments of crushing reality followed by periods of numb functionality. It helps to see how many people loved them. "They were extraordinary people," Margaret agreed, keeping her arm around my shoulders. "And they were so proud of you, Eleanor. Your mother called me just last week, gushing about the literacy program you started at the library." A lump formed in my throat. She never mentioned that to me. "They didn't need to tell you," Margaret said softly. "They showed it in how they spoke about you to everyone else." Catherine materialized beside us, her smile bright, but her eyes cool. "Aunt Margaret, so good of you to come all this way." She leaned in for a brief, careful hug that wouldn't disturb her makeup. "Will you be joining us at the house? We're having a small gathering before meeting with the family lawyer." The way she emphasized family lawyer carried an unmistakable undertone of anticipation. Margaret's eyes flickered between us, sensing something I couldn't quite identify. "Of course, dear," she said, patting Catherine's arm. "I'll be there shortly." As the crowd gradually dispersed, Catherine and I made our way to our separate cars. She had rented a sleek black SUV for her visit, unwilling to be seen in anything less impressive, while I drove the same reliable sedan I'd had for nearly a decade. "I'll meet you at the house," she called over her shoulder. "Don't wait for me if I'm delayed. I need to make a quick call." I nodded, watching as she slid into the driver's seat and immediately began applying fresh lipstick in the rear view mirror. The contrast between us had never felt more pronounced, Catherine approaching even our parents' funeral as a networking opportunity, while I struggled to maintain my composure through genuine grief. The drive to our childhood home took less than 10 minutes, but it provided a welcome moment of solitude. Passing through the familiar streets of Millfield, past the elementary school we had both attended, the park where Dad had taught us to, ride bikes, the ice cream shop where Mom would take us after dentist appointments as a contradictory reward, I felt the reality of their absence settling into my bones. They would never again wave from the porch as I pulled into the driveway, never call just to check in, never send a care package of homemade cookies just because. Several cars were already parked along the curb when I arrived. Mrs. Caldwell, from next door, had organized the post-funeral gathering, coordinating a group of my parents' friends to provide food and ensure Catherine and I wouldn't have to worry about hosting details. The gesture was typical of the community my parents had nurtured, practical, thoughtful, and executed without fanfare. Inside, the house looked both familiar and strange. The furniture was exactly where it had always been, my mother's collection, a vintage teacup still displayed in the glass cabinet, my father's beloved books lining the shelves. But something essential was missing: the energy that had made this building a home. Without my mother's humming in the kitchen or my father's absent-minded commentary on whatever he was reading, the rooms felt like a museum dedicated to a life that no longer existed. People moved through the space with the awkward reverence reserved for the recently bereaved, offering food I couldn't imagine eating and platitudes that washed over me without penetrating the fog of grief. I accepted each interaction with automatic gratitude, moving through the motions of being a good hostess as my mother would have expected. Catherine arrived 45 minutes later, making an entrance that temporarily shifted everyone's attention. She moved through the gathering with practiced charm, accepting condolences with gracious nods and strategically placed tears. From across the room, I watched as she engaged with distant relatives, subtly steering conversations toward herself. How difficult the loss was for her specifically, how challenging it had been to put her life in Los Angeles on hold, how brave, She was being through it all. She hasn't changed much, has she? I turned to find James Anderson standing beside me, a plate of untouched food in his hands. We had dated briefly in high school before settling into a comfortable friendship that had survived my years at university and his time in the military. Now Millfield's chief of police, James had been one of the first people I'd called after receiving the news about my parents. Catherine has always known how to work a room, I said, more tired than bitter. James nodded, his expression sympathetic. How are you really doing, Ellie? The question, asked without performance or pretense, nearly cracked my carefully maintained composure. I'm not sure yet, I admitted. It doesn't quite feel real. It won't for a while, he said quietly. After my dad passed, I kept picking up the phone to call him for months. The simple honesty of his response was more comforting than all the formal condolences combined. We stood in companionable silence for a few moments, watching the social dynamics of the gathering unfold. Mr. Harrington just arrived, James eventually noted, nodding toward the front door where my parents' lawyer was removing his overcoat. Want me to run interference with Catherine while you greet him? I smiled gratefully. That obvious, huh? Only to someone who's known you both since elementary school, he replied with a gentle squeeze of my shoulder before moving toward my sister, who was currently dominating a conversation with my father's oldest friend. Robert Harrington had been my parents' attorney, financial advisor, and friend for as long as I could remember. His silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him the appearance of a distinguished professor rather than a small-town lawyer. He spotted me immediately and crossed the room with purposeful strides. Eleanor, he said warmly, clasping my hands in his, my deepest condolences. Your parents were extraordinary people. Thank you for coming, Mr. Harrington, and for handling everything so efficiently. Of course. He looked around the crowded living room. Perhaps we should discuss the arrangements for reviewing the will. Your parents were very specific about their wishes. Before I could respond, Catherine materialized beside us, as if summoned by the mention of the will. Mr. Harrington, she said, extending her hand. I'm Catherine Mitchell, Eleanor's sister. I believe we spoke briefly on the phone yesterday. Yes, Ms. Mitchell. As I was just telling Eleanor, we should make arrangements for the reading of the will. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Catherine nodded eagerly. We could clear the house now if you're ready. These things are best handled promptly, don't you think? Mr. Harrington adjusted his glasses. Actually, your parents left explicit instructions. The will is to be read tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. in my office, with both of you present along with a few specific individuals they named. Catherine's perfectly maintained smile faltered slightly. Tomorrow? But I have a flight back to Los Angeles scheduled for tomorrow evening. Surely we can just handle it now while everyone is already here. I'm afraid your parents were quite specific, Mr. Harrington replied, his tone polite but firm. 10 a.m. tomorrow at my office on Main Street. They also requested that their close friend Dr. Howard Chen be present, along with your Aunt Margaret. I watched confusion flicker across Catherine's face. Dr. Chen? Dad's colleague from the biology department? What could he possibly have to do with our parents' will? Mr. Harrington's expression revealed nothing. All will be explained tomorrow, Ms. Mitchell. Now, if you'll excuse me, I should pay my respects to some of your parents' other friends before I depart. As he moved away, Catherine turned to me, irritation evident in the tight set of her jaw. This is ridiculous. Why the theatrics? Why can't he just tell us what's in the will now? Mom and Dad must have had their reasons, I said, though I shared her confusion about Dr. Chen's involvement. The biologist had been a frequent dinner guest throughout our childhood, but I had never considered him particularly close to my parents. Catherine made a dismissive sound. It's probably just Dad being dramatic from beyond the grave. You know, how he loved his mysteries and plot twists. She checked her diamond-studded watch. Well, I guess I'll have to change my flight. Not that there's likely to be much worth staying for. The implication was clear. She didn't expect the inheritance to be substantial. Our parents had lived comfortably but modestly on my father's professor's salary, and my mother's part-time income from the bookstore she managed. The house was their primary asset, and Catherine had made it clear during her infrequent visits that she found it painfully outdated and provincial. I'm sure they provided for both of us fairly, I said, trying to keep the conversation from devolving into an argument during our parents' memorial gathering. Catherine's smile didn't reach. Her eyes. Oh, I'm not worried about fair, Eleanor. I just hope they were realistic about our different situations. Your life here is... She gestured vaguely at the modest living room. Already established. Meanwhile, I'm trying to build a career in one of the most expensive cities in the country. The familiar dismissal of my choices stung, but I had long ago learned that engaging with Catherine's competitive comparisons only encouraged them. Instead, I excused myself to check on Aunt Margaret, who was sitting quietly in our father's favorite armchair, looking through an old photo album she had found on the bookshelf. Find anything good? I asked, perching on the ottoman beside her. She smiled, turning the album so I could see. Your 5th birthday. Look at you, so serious about cutting the cake precisely right. The photograph showed me in pigtails and a party dress, my young face concentrated on the task at hand while my parents watched with obvious delight. Catherine, still a toddler, was reaching for the cake from our mother's arms, already showing signs of the impulsiveness that would characterize her approach to life. Some things never change, I said with a small smile. Margaret patted my hand. More things than you might realize. She closed the album carefully. Are you staying in the house tonight? I nodded. It seemed easier than going back and forth. From my place. Catherine's staying in her old room too. Good. You shouldn't be alone right now. She glanced across the room to where Catherine was engaging animatedly with a distant cousin who worked in television. Either of you. As the afternoon progressed, guests gradually departed with final hugs and promises to check in soon. By early evening, only family remained. Aunt Margaret, Uncle Philip, a few cousins who had traveled from out of state, and Catherine, who had retreated to her old bedroom to make some important calls. I moved through the house in a daze, collecting abandoned plates and glasses on autopilot. The mundane task provided a temporary focus, something concrete to accomplish when everything else felt impossibly abstract. The reality that my parents would never again walk through the front door, never sit at the kitchen table drinking coffee and doing crossword puzzles together, never call me with random questions about library operations or updates about neighborhood happenings. It was still too enormous to fully comprehend. Leave those, Eleanor, Aunt Margaret said gently, taking a stack of plates from my hands. Philip and I will clean up. You should rest. I don't think I can, I admitted. Every time I stop moving, it hits me all over again. She nodded, understanding. I felt the same after your grandfather died. I reorganized my entire kitchen at 3 a.m. She guided me to the sofa. But you need to preserve your strength for tomorrow. What do you think is going on with the will? I asked, finally voicing the question that had been nagging at me. Why the specific instructions? And why include Dr. Chen? Margaret's expression was carefully neutral. I think we should respect your parents' wishes and wait until tomorrow for those answers. Something in her tone suggested she knew more than she was saying, but before I could press further, Catherine descended the stairs, her irritation preceding her like a storm front. This is completely unacceptable, she announced, waving her phone for emphasis. Do you know how much it costs to change a last-minute first-class ticket? And for what? Some dramatic reading of a will that could have been handled today? Catherine, Margaret began. Your parents had their reasons. Their reasons are irrelevant now, aren't they? Catherine interrupted. They're gone, and we're left dealing with the practical consequences. I have commitments in Los Angeles, a callback, for a significant role that I've now had to reschedule at the risk of losing the opportunity entirely. I felt a flash of anger cut through my grief. Our parents just died, Catherine. Maybe your acting career can take a back seat for a few days. Her eyes narrowed. Easy for you to say. Your little library job will be waiting regardless. Some of us have to fight for every opportunity. Before I could respond, Margaret stepped between us. This is neither the time nor the place. You're both grieving, and grief makes us say things we don't mean. Catherine huffed but didn't argue further. Fine, I'll meet you all at the lawyer's office tomorrow. I assume there's nothing else requiring my presence tonight? Without waiting for an answer, she grabbed her designer coat and purse. I need some air. Don't wait up. The front door closed behind her with more force than necessary, leaving an awkward silence in her wake. She's always been theatrical, I said finally, attempting to lighten the mood. Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. Get some rest, Eleanor. Tomorrow will be significant. Her choice of words struck me as odd, but exhaustion was beginning to overshadow curiosity. After seeing the remaining family members off with promises to reconnect tomorrow, I found myself alone in my childhood, home for the first time since the accident. The silence was overwhelming. I moved from room to room, touching familiar objects. My father's reading glasses left on his desk, my mother's gardening gloves hung by the back door, waiting for hands that would never wear them again. Each item was a fragment of the life they had built, now frozen in time like artifacts in a museum. In their bedroom, everything remained exactly as they had left it that final morning. My mother's novel open on her nightstand, my father's sweater draped over the chair, their shared closet still holding his and hers bathrobes, side by side after 4 decades of marriage. The intimacy of the space made their absence even more palpable. I sat on the edge of their bed, finally allowing the tears I had controlled all day to flow freely. The grief came in overwhelming waves, memories flooding back with each sob. My father teaching me to read, my mother bandaging scraped knees, both of them attending every school event despite busy schedules, their unwavering support when I decided to become a librarian rather than pursue a more lucrative career. They had been imperfect parents in the way all parents are imperfect, sometimes distracted, occasionally misunderstanding, human in their limitations. But they had loved consistently, showing up day after day with unwavering commitment. That foundation had shaped my approach to life, informing my choices and values in ways I was only beginning to fully appreciate now that they were gone. Catherine had experienced the same parenting, yet had emerged with such different priorities and perspectives. Had there been something fundamentally different in how our parents had related to each of us? Or had we simply interpreted the same love through different lenses? These questions, previously academic, now felt urgent in light of tomorrow's mysterious meeting. Eventually, exhaustion overcame grief, and I fell asleep fully clothed atop my parents' bed, surrounded by their lingering scent and the echoes of a lifetime of love. Morning arrived with harsh clarity, sunlight streaming through windows. My mother would have opened to let in the fresh air. I woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where I was and why. Then reality crashed back with merciless force. The accident, the funeral, the impending reading of the will. After a quick shower and change of clothes, I made coffee in the kitchen, where my parents had started every day together for decades. The familiar ritual brought both comfort and pain, muscle memory carrying me through motions my mother had performed thousands of times, while my conscious mind grappled with her permanent absence. Catherine arrived precisely at 9:30, impeccably, dressed in another designer outfit that somehow managed to be both funeral-appropriate and fashion-forward. Her makeup was flawless, concealing any evidence of the emotional toll the past days might have taken. "You're wearing that?" she asked by way of greeting, eyeing my simple black dress and cardigan. "Good morning to you too," I replied, choosing to ignore the critique. "Coffee?" She shook her head. "Already had my morning matcha. We should get going. I want to speak with Mr. Harrington before this official reading begins." The drive to the lawyer's office was silent, tension filling the car like an invisible third passenger. Catherine checked her phone repeatedly, sighing dramatically at messages that apparently required her urgent attention. I focused on the familiar streets of Millfield, drawing comfort from the unchanging backdrop of my life. Mr. Harrington's office occupied the second floor of one of Main Street's historic buildings, its entrance marked by a discreet brass plaque, rather than ostentatious signage. The reception area was warmly traditional: leather chairs, oak wainscoting, and actual paper files visible on the assistant's desk. "Ms. Reynolds, Ms. Mitchell," the receptionist greeted us with professional warmth. "Mr. Harrington is expecting you. Dr. Chen and Mrs. Bradford have already arrived." Catherine immediately straightened, her expression shifting to what I recognized as her networking mode: alert, charming, and calculating all at once. Perfect timing, then. We were led to a conference room where Aunt Margaret and Dr. Chen sat on opposite sides of a polished table. Mr. Harrington stood when we entered, gesturing to the two remaining chairs. "Thank you both for coming. I know this is a difficult time, but your parents were adamant about the handling of their estate." He placed a folder on the table, his movements deliberate and formal. "Before we begin, I should mention that they left a letter to be read first." Catherine shifted impatiently. "A letter? Is that really necessary before getting to the terms?" "Of the will?" "It is, according to your parents' explicit instructions," Mr. Harrington replied, his tone making it clear this wasn't negotiable. He removed an envelope from the folder and broke the seal. "This is addressed to both of you in your mother's handwriting." As he began to read, I noticed Dr. Chen watching us with an intensity that seemed out of place for my father's genial colleague. Something significant was unfolding, though I couldn't yet discern its shape. "My dearest daughters," Mr. Harrington read, "if you're hearing this, then Howard and I have left this world, hopefully together as we've lived most of our lives. There is no easy way to share what follows, but we believe you deserve the truth, however belated it may be." "My dearest daughters," Mr. Harrington continued reading from my mother's letter, "if you're hearing this, then Howard and I have left this world, hopefully together as we've lived most of our lives. There is no easy way to share what follows, but we believe you deserve the truth, however belated it may be." Eleanor Catherine, the story of our family is more complicated than we've ever revealed to you. Howard Reynolds was not your biological father. The words hung in the air like suspended particles of dust. I felt as though I'd been struck, my breath catching painfully in my chest. Beside me, Catherine had gone completely still, her usual performative reactions abandoned in genuine shock. "This may come as a profound shock," Mr. Harrington continued, his professional demeanor softening slightly in acknowledgement of the bombshell he was delivering. "But please understand that Howard loved you both with his entire heart, from the moment you entered his life. In his mind and soul, he was your father in every way that matters." Catherine found her voice first. "This is absurd," she said, her tone sharp with disbelief. "Some kind of terrible joke. Our father—" Her voice caught on the word. "Dad would never have kept something like this from us." Mr. Harrington paused, his expression sympathetic but firm. "I assure you, Ms. Mitchell, this is not a joke. Your parents," he corrected himself, "your mother and Howard consulted with me extensively about how to handle this disclosure. If you'll allow me to continue, I believe the letter will answer many of your questions. I nodded numbly, unable to form words. My entire understanding of my family history was crumbling, leaving me unmoored in a sea of uncertainty. The truth is both simple and complicated, the letter continued. I met your biological father, Dr. Howard Chen, during my first year working at the university library. He was a brilliant young biology professor, newly arrived from China on a research fellowship. Our connection was immediate and profound, but also impossible due to the social realities of the time. In 1985, an interracial relationship between a Chinese immigrant scientist and a small-town librarian created complications neither of us was prepared to navigate. When I discovered I was pregnant with Eleanor, we were faced with impossible choices in a time and place that offered little support for our situation. Howard Reynolds was my dear friend from childhood, who had always held deep feelings for me. When I confided in him about my pregnancy, he offered a solution that seemed at the time to be the best path forward for everyone involved. He would marry me, give the baby his name, and we would raise the child together as our own. Dr. Chen, facing pressure from his department and concerned about his visa status, reluctantly agreed. What began as an arrangement of convenience evolved into genuine love and partnership. Howard Reynolds became my true companion, my best friend, and a devoted father. When Catherine was born 7 years later, she too was Howard Chen's biological child, conceived during a brief reconciliation that we all ultimately recognized was a mistake, as it threatened the stable family we had built. Throughout your childhoods, Dr. Chen remained in our lives as a family friend and your father's colleague. This arrangement, while painful for him, allowed him to be part of your lives in some capacity while maintaining the stability of the family unit we had created. I found myself looking at Dr. Chen through new eyes, searching his face for features I might recognize in my own. How had I never seen it? The slight almond shape of the eyes that I shared. The same widow's peak that had always seemed at odds with my father's, with Howard Reynolds. Straight hairline. Dr. Chen met my gaze, his expression a complex mixture of sorrow, hope, and trepidation. He had always been kind to me during his visits, showing particular interest in my academic achievements and career choices. I had attributed his attention to collegial courtesy, never imagining a deeper connection. We debated for years about whether to tell you the truth, Mr. Harrington continued reading. Each time we considered it, we worried about disrupting your sense of identity and family. Perhaps this was cowardice disguised as protection. Perhaps it was genuine concern for your well-being. Whatever our reasoning, we now leave the choice to you about how to proceed with this information. Dr. Chen has respected our family boundaries for over 35 years, asking for nothing while quietly contributing to your education funds and future security. He has expressed to us that he would welcome a relationship with both of you, should you desire it, but expects nothing. The choice to connect with him is entirely yours. As for the practical matters of inheritance, Howard and I have structured our will to reflect both our legal obligations and our moral ones. The details will be explained by Mr. Harrington, but we have tried to provide for both our daughters while acknowledging the complex truth of our family. Please know that every decision we made, however flawed, was guided by love. For each other, for both of you, and yes, for Howard Chen, who sacrificed his paternal recognition to give you stability. We hope you can find it in your hearts to forgive our deception and understand the complicated time and circumstances that led to these choices. Our deepest wish is that this truth might eventually bring healing rather than division. With eternal love, Margaret Reynolds. The room fell into profound silence as Mr. Harrington carefully folded the letter and returned it to its envelope. Catherine's face had lost all color, her usual poise completely abandoned. I felt strangely calm, shock, perhaps, or the peculiar clarity that sometimes accompanies life-altering revelations. "This is impossible," Catherine finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. We can't be. She gestured vaguely between herself and Dr. Chen. I'm not. Dr. Chen spoke for the first time, his accented English soft but clear. I understand this is a tremendous shock. I have prepared myself for your anger, your disbelief, even your rejection. All are natural responses to such news. Natural? Catherine's voice rose sharply. There is nothing natural about discovering your entire life has been a lie. Nothing natural about learning your identity has been. She broke off, visibly struggling for control. I found myself studying Dr. Chen more intently. His dignified bearing, the thoughtful way he chose his words, the gentle intelligence in his eyes. I had always admired these qualities during his visits to our home. Had some part of me recognized our connection on a level beyond conscious awareness? Dr. Chen, I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. Did you want to acknowledge us? All these years? His expression softened. Every day, he said simply. But I also wanted you to have stability, security, and social acceptance that would have been complicated by the truth. Howard Reynolds was an extraordinary man who gave you something I could not at that time, a father whose legal and social right to parent you would never be questioned. Catherine's laugh held no humor. So noble, all of you making decisions about our lives, our identities, without ever considering we deserve the truth. Catherine, Aunt Margaret interjected, gently. Your parents, all three of them, were navigating impossible circumstances in a very different time. You knew? I asked, suddenly realizing the implication of her presence at this meeting. All along? Margaret nodded. I was there when Eleanor was born. Someone needed to know the truth in case something happened to Margaret. And Howard. They trusted me to help you understand if this day ever came. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat. If you feel able to proceed, there are practical matters regarding the will that we should address. Catherine straightened, her inherent pragmatism reasserting itself through the shock. Yes, let's get to the inheritance portion of this family. Revelation. Her words carried a bitter edge, but I recognized the deflection for what it was. A retreat to familiar territory of material concerns, rather than facing the emotional earthquake of our newly revealed origins. Very well, Mr. Harrington said, opening a different document. The will itself is quite straightforward. The family home in Millfield and all its contents are left to Eleanor Reynolds, along with a life insurance policy valued at $250,000. Catherine's head snapped up, her expression hardening. The entire house? To Eleanor? What about me? Mr. Harrington held up a hand, requesting patience. To Catherine Mitchell, your parents have left their vacation cabin at Cedar Lake, along with a separate life insurance policy also valued at $250,000. The cabin? Catherine's voice dripped with disdain. That tiny two-bedroom in the middle of nowhere that needs a complete renovation? How is that remotely equivalent to the house? I remained silent, processing this information alongside the earlier revelation. The house had never been particularly grand, a comfortable four-bedroom colonial that needed updating, but it represented stability and continuity, qualities I had always valued. Catherine, with her Hollywood aspirations, had repeatedly dismissed it as provincial and outdated. Her sudden interest seemed driven more by the perceived inequity than by any genuine attachment to our childhood home. There's more, Mr. Harrington continued calmly. Dr. Chen has maintained 2 trust funds, established at each of your births, which have grown considerably over the years. These funds were technically created by your parents, with Dr. Chen as the primary contributor, to maintain the family narrative. He turned to another document. The Eleanor Reynolds Trust is currently valued at approximately $2 million. The Catherine Mitchell Trust holds an equal amount. The figure momentarily silenced even Catherine. Our modest middle-class family had never hinted at this level of financial provision. I looked to Dr. Chen, who sat with quiet dignity, his expression revealing nothing. Additionally, Mr. Harrington continued, Dr. Chen has established a foundation in your mother's name, the Margaret Reynolds Literary Foundation, with both of you named as board members should you choose to accept the positions. The foundation is endowed with $5 million with the mission of supporting literacy programs and library science education, particularly for students from diverse backgrounds. The room fell silent again as we absorbed the implications. Our lives had been funded, in part by a man we had known only as our father's colleague, a man who, it turned out, was our actual biological father. The financial support revealed a level of care and commitment that contradicted any narrative of abandonment. Why? Catherine asked Dr. Chen directly, her voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. Why put all this money aside for children you weren't even acknowledging? Dr. Chen's hands rested calmly on the conference table. Because you were always my daughters, even when I could not claim you publicly. Your mother and Howard allowed me to contribute to your future security as a poor substitute for the daily fathering I couldn't provide. It was the least I could. Did you ever regret the arrangement? I asked, finding myself genuinely curious rather than accusatory. Watching another man raise your children? A flash of pain crossed his features before his composure returned. Regret is too simple a word. I experienced profound grief at what I couldn't share with you. The daily moments of your childhoods, the right to openly love you as a father. But I never regretted the stability and love Howard provided. He was an extraordinary father in all the ways that matter most. Catherine pushed her chair back abruptly. This is overwhelming. I need some air. She stood, gathering her designer purse with trembling hands. I can't process all of this at once. Mr. Harrington nodded, understanding. Of course, these documents aren't going anywhere. We can reconvene when you've had time to absorb the information. I'll come with you, Aunt Margaret offered, rising to follow Catherine. As they left, an awkward silence descended on the conference room. Dr. Chen, my biological father, a concept still too enormous to fully comprehend, watched me with careful attention, clearly trying to gauge my emotional state. You have questions, he said finally. I have waited 36 years to answer them, if you will allow me. The gentleness in his voice unlocked something in my chest. Did you love her? My mother? His smile held decades of complicated emotion. From the moment I saw her shelving books in the university library. She had this way of completely focusing on whatever was before her, the book in her hands, the person asking a question, the flower she was planting. That quality of presence was rare and beautiful. I nodded, recognizing the description of my mother's characteristic attentiveness. And did you resent him, Howard? I hesitated. Dad? I tried to, he admitted with surprising candor. In the beginning, I told myself he had taken what should have been mine, but Howard Reynolds made that impossible. He loved your mother, with complete devotion, and raised you girls with extraordinary care. He never treated me as a threat or an intruder, even when it would have been natural to do so. Instead, he found ways to include me in your lives without compromising the family structure. He paused, emotion briefly overtaking his usual reserve. He was a far better man than most would have been in that situation. Mr. Harrington discreetly excused himself, leaving us alone in the conference room. Through the glass wall, I could see Catherine pacing in the reception area, her animated gestures suggesting she was processing the revelations in her characteristically dramatic fashion. All those dinners at our house, I said slowly, memories rearranging themselves into a new pattern. The interest in my school projects, the books you always brought, they weren't just colleague courtesies. He shook his head. They were, father's poor attempts to connect within the boundaries we had established. Your mother and Howard were generous in allowing those small interactions. Many men in Howard's position would have found it too threatening. Did Catherine know? Did either of us ever suspect? The question had been forming since the initial revelation. Not consciously, I don't believe. Though children often sense things beyond their understanding. He hesitated, then added, "You once asked your mother, when you were about 5, why Dr. Chen's eyes looked like yours when Daddy's didn't. She told me later that her heart nearly stopped, but she explained that many people have similar features without being related." The memory surfaced faintly. A casual observation made during childhood that had apparently created momentary panic for the adults maintaining the carefully constructed narrative of our family. "I would understand," Dr. Chen said carefully, "if you need time before deciding whether you want any relationship with me. This revelation changes nothing about the father who raised you, and everything about how you might see yourself and your history." His consideration touched me unexpectedly. Here was a man who had waited more than 3 decades for the possibility of acknowledgement, yet he was placing my emotional needs above his long-deferred desire for recognition. "I think," I said slowly, "that I would like to know you. Not to replace the father who raised me, but to understand the complete truth of where I come from." The relief that crossed his features revealed how carefully he had been controlling his hopes. "That is more than I dared expect, Eleanor. Thank you." The door opened as Catherine returned, her expression now carefully composed, though her eyes remained turbulent. Aunt Margaret followed, her posture suggesting she was prepared to intervene if necessary. "I've been thinking," Catherine announced, without preamble. "The house should be sold and the proceeds divided equally between us. It's the only fair approach given these extraordinary circumstances." I felt a flash of familiar frustration at her transactional approach to what was fundamentally an emotional situation. "That wasn't what they wanted, Catherine. Mom and Dad, Howard, specifically left the house to me, probably because they knew I would want to keep it while you've made it clear for years that you have no interest in Millfield. That was before I knew our entire childhood was based on a convenient arrangement," she countered, her voice taking on the sharp edge I recognized from countless previous conflicts. "Besides, you've always had the privilege of being the firstborn, the favorite. Now I understand why. You were the reason for their marriage in the first place." "Catherine," Dr. Chen said gently, "I don't believe that's an accurate interpretation of your parents' feelings. They loved you both deeply and equally." She turned to him, eyes flashing. "With all due respect, Dr. Chen, you don't get to step in as a parental authority now. You gave up that right 36 years ago." The harshness of her words visibly affected him, though he maintained his composure. "You're right that I have not earned the right to guide your choices. I apologize for overstepping." His dignified acceptance of her rebuke seemed to unbalance Catherine momentarily. She had expected defensiveness or authority, not this humble acknowledgement of his limited role. "The fact remains," she continued, turning back to me, "that these revelations change the context of the will entirely. If we're being honest, neither of us knows what we would have wanted had they been truthful from the beginning." "They made their decisions, Catherine," I said firmly. "Maybe they weren't perfect decisions, but they were made with love and the best intentions given impossible circumstances. Honoring their wishes about the inheritance seems like the least we can do." "Easy for you to say when those wishes favor you," she shot back. Mr. Harrington, who had returned to the conference room, cleared his throat. "If I may interject, your parents anticipated potential conflict over the distribution. There is a video they recorded 2 years ago that they asked to be played in the event of disagreement." Without waiting for our response, he opened a laptop and queued up a file. The screen filled with our parents' faces, Mom looking slightly uncomfortable with the technology, Dad, Howard, with his characteristic gentle smile. They sat side by side on their living room sofa, the familiar setting creating an immediate ache of loss in my chest. "Hello, girls," our mother began, her voice bringing an unexpected surge of tears to my eyes. If you're watching this, then you've learned the truth about our family, and you're probably having strong reactions to both the revelations and our decisions about the inheritance. Howard nodded beside her. We want to explain our thinking about the distribution, in hopes that you'll understand our intentions. My mother continued. Eleanor, we've left you the house because you've built your life in Millfield, near the Sy. Home and community you've always loved. The house represents continuity and roots, values that have always been important to you. Howard picked up smoothly, their practiced coordination evident even in this recorded message. Catherine, we've left you the lake house because it represents possibility and retreat, a place that could be renovated according to your vision, or sold to fund your creative pursuits in California. We tried to match what we left each of you to the values and priorities you've demonstrated throughout your lives. The financial provisions are identical, my mother added, because our love for each of you has always been equal and unconditional, regardless of the complicated circumstances of your births. Howard's expression grew more serious. Girls, we understand that learning about Dr. Chen's role in your lives may feel like a betrayal of trust. That responsibility is ours alone. He wanted to acknowledge you from the beginning, but respected our decision about what we felt would give you the most stable childhood in a time when mixed-race families faced significant challenges. Whatever you decide about developing a relationship with him, my mother said, her eyes suddenly shining with unshed tears, please know that he has loved you from afar with remarkable constancy. And please know that Howard has been your true father in every way that matters most. Howard smiled, the familiar crinkles around his eyes deepening. Being your father has been the greatest privilege of my life. Biology is just chemistry. Fatherhood is showing up day after day with love and presence. By that measure, I have been blessed beyond measure to be your dad. The video ended, freezing on their smiling faces, captured 2 years ago. Never. Imagining that within 24 months they would both be gone, leaving behind this digital time capsule of explanation and love. The room remained silent as the impact of their direct address from beyond settled over us. Catherine, for once, seemed at a loss for words, her usual quick retort suspended by the visible evidence of our parents' thoughtful consideration. They really did think about what would matter to each of us, I said finally, breaking the silence. The house for me, the lake property for you, they weren't making arbitrary distinctions. Catherine didn't respond immediately, her gaze still fixed on the frozen image of our parents. When she finally spoke, her voice carried none of its usual sharp edges. They looked so normal, sitting there together, knowing this massive secret, planning for its revelation, yet they just looked like Mom and Dad. They were Mom and Dad, I said gently. This truth doesn't erase the reality of how they raised us, the family we were. Dr. Chen, who had watched the video with visible emotion, spoke quietly. Your parents were extraordinary people who made difficult choices in complicated circumstances. Whatever you may think of those choices, please believe that they were made with deep love for both of you. Catherine turned to him, really looking at him perhaps for the first time since the revelation. Did you ever consider fighting for us? Legally challenging the arrangement? He shook his head. In the 1980s, as a Chinese immigrant on a temporary visa, my legal position was extremely vulnerable. But more importantly, disrupting your stable family would have served my needs at the expense of yours. That was never a sacrifice I was willing to make. His answer seemed to affect Catherine deeply. The self-interest she had initially attributed to all the adults involved in our family secret was difficult to maintain in the face of such evident self-sacrifice. I need time, she said finally, to process all of this, to figure out what it means for how I understand myself, my childhood, everything. Dr. Chen nodded. Of course. I have waited 36 years. I can wait longer for whatever relationship you might eventually want. There is no pressure, no expectation. The grace in his response struck me powerfully. This man, who had endured decades of watching his biological children grow up from a careful distance, was still placing our needs above his own understandable desire for connection. As we prepared to leave the conference room, I found myself at a crossroads of emotion. Grief for the parents I had lost, confusion about the rewritten narrative of my origins, curiosity about the biological father I had known only as a family, friend, and strange gratitude for the thoughtfulness with which all three of my parents had tried to provide for our futures, both emotionally and practically. Catherine and I walked silently to the parking lot, the morning's revelations having momentarily suspended our usual pattern of conflict. At her rental car, she paused, keys in hand. "What will you do?" she asked, the question encompassing far more than just my immediate plans. "Process," I answered honestly. "Grieve. Try to understand. Eventually, I think I'll want to know him better, not to replace Dad, but to complete the picture." She nodded, her expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I don't know if I can do that. It feels like betrayal somehow." "I understand," I said, and surprisingly I did. Catherine's relationship with our father, with Howard, had always been different from mine, characterized by a mutual admiration society that sometimes left me feeling like the practical, less exciting daughter. Learning that he wasn't her biological father might feel like the foundation of that special relationship had been built on quicksand. "Whatever you decide," I added, "we're still sisters. That hasn't changed." For a moment, her carefully constructed facade cracked completely, revealing genuine emotion beneath. Full sisters, apparently, not just half, as I always secretly wondered given how different we are. The admission surprised me. "You thought we might be half-siblings?" She shrugged, a gesture attempting casualness but failing to hide deeper feelings. "You were always so different, more like Dad with your books and quiet ways. I thought maybe Mom had been married before, or had you with someone else. I never imagined." She trailed off, gesturing vaguely to encompass the morning's revelations. The irony wasn't lost on either of us. Catherine had imagined a secret that placed me as the biological outsider, when in reality, we were both connected to a father we had never truly known. "We have a lot to figure out," I said finally. "Individually and together." She nodded, composing herself with visible effort. "I'm going back to LA tomorrow. I need distance from all of this to think clearly, but—" She hesitated, then continued with unusual sincerity. "I'll stay in touch this time." "Really?" As I watched her drive away, I felt the weight of the morning's revelations settle more fully. The parents I had known and loved were gone, but they had left behind not just material provisions, but also the truth, complicated, messy, and long overdue. Now it was up to me to determine what to do with that truth, how to incorporate it into my understanding of myself and my family history. Outside the law office, spring sunshine illuminated Main Street with painful brightness, the ordinary rhythms of small-town life continuing unaffected by my personal earthquake. Across the street, the library where I had built my career stood as a testament to continuity amid change. Inside those walls, I had discovered my professional calling, following in my mother's footsteps without knowing she had met my biological father in just such a place. The patterns of our lives, I realized, contained more meaning than I had previously recognized. Threads connecting generations in ways both visible and hidden. The truth my parents had finally shared offered not just disruption, but also the possibility of new understanding, new connections, and perhaps eventually a more complete sense of identity. The days following the revelation at the lawyer's office took on a dreamlike quality. I moved through my routine tasks, reopening the library after a brief closure, responding to condolence messages, sorting through the practical administrative details that follow death. all while carrying the weight of this new understanding of my origins. Catherine departed for Los Angeles as planned, but something had shifted in our interactions. The text messages she sent were less performative, more authentic. Brief updates about her flight, a question about some childhood photos she wanted, copies of, even a tentative inquiry about how I was processing everything. The competitive edge that had characterized our relationship for decades seemed temporarily suspended in the face of our shared discovery. Dr. Chen, Howard Chen, my biological father, had given me his contact information with gentle assurance that I could reach out whenever I felt ready, if I ever did. No pressure, no expectations, he had said, his calm dignity only increasing my curiosity about this man whose blood ran in my veins, yet whose life remained largely unknown to me. 1 week after the funeral, I found myself alone in my parents' house, my house now, according to the will, surrounded by the physical evidence of the life they had built. Books lined every available shelf, testifying to my father's, to Howard, Reynolds' love of literature and learning. My mother's gardens bloomed outside the windows, her careful planning ensuring continuous color from early spring through late autumn. Photos chronicled family vacations, graduations, ordinary moments, preserved in time. What struck me most powerfully was that knowing the truth about my biological parentage didn't diminish the reality of the family depicted in those photos. Howard Reynolds had been my father in every meaningful sense of the word, present at bedtime stories and swim lessons, school plays and college move-in days. The man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had built bookshelves for my growing collection, who had walked me down the aisle at my brief, unsuccessful marriage, and welcomed me home without judgment when it ended. As I moved through the house, that evening, collecting items that needed attention, mail to sort, plants to water, trash to take out, I found myself in my father's study. The space had always been a sanctuary of sorts, lined with bookshelves and featuring the comfortable leather chair where he had spent countless hours reading and grading papers. His desk remained as he had left it, organized yet lived in, with a half-completed crossword puzzle still open beside his favorite pen. On impulse, I sat in his chair, running my fingers over the smooth wooden surface of the desk he had inherited from his own father. The drawer on the right contained supplies, paper, clips, stamps, spare pens. The center drawer held stationery and envelopes. The left drawer, always kept locked during his lifetime, was now accessible, the small key having been included among the personal effects returned by the hospital. I hesitated, feeling like an intruder, despite my legal ownership of everything, in the house. Whatever my father had considered private enough to keep locked away deserved respect. And yet, the events of the past week had demonstrated that respecting my parents' privacy had also meant remaining ignorant of fundamental truths about my own identity. With trembling fingers, I inserted the small brass key and turned it. The drawer slid open smoothly, revealing a stack of leather-bound journals arranged by date, each bearing my father's distinctive handwriting on the spine. Journals I had never known he kept. The earliest dated back to 1985, the year of my birth. I lifted it carefully, feeling the weight of history in my hands. Opening to the first entry, dated January 17, 1985, I began to read. Margaret told me today about the baby. She is carrying another man's child, Chen's child, yet all I could feel was concern for her distress rather than my own wounded pride. She expects me to withdraw my proposal, to leave her to face this alone. Instead, I find myself more determined than ever to create a life with her. This child, innocent of the circumstances of its conception, deserves a father who will be present and devoted. If Margaret will still have me, I want to be that father. Tears blurred my vision as I continued, reading, following the journey of a young man choosing to embrace a child not biologically his own. His entries revealed moments of doubt, certainly, wondering if he would be able to love me fully, questioning whether Margaret still had feelings for Dr. Chen, worrying about his own adequacy as a father. But they also documented the first time he felt me kick through my mother's abdomen, the awe he experienced when holding me after birth, the overwhelming love that took him by surprise. Eleanor Rose Reynolds arrived at 2:17 this morning. He wrote on April 3, 1985. 6 pounds, 8 ounces of absolute perfection. When the nurse placed her in my arms, something extraordinary happened. This tiny being with Chen's eyes and Margaret's nose became, in an instant, my daughter. The biological realities seem suddenly irrelevant in the face of this profound connection. I will spend my life ensuring she never doubts she is deeply, completely loved. Hour after hour, I read through his journals, following the evolution of our family through his thoughtful, honest documentation. The complex arrangement with Dr. Chen, initially tense and awkward, gradually evolved into a relationship of mutual respect and eventually genuine friendship, bound by shared concern for my well-being. The arrival of Catherine 7 years later, another biological child of my mother and Dr. Chen, was recorded with the same love and commitment. Another daughter, he wrote on June 12, 1992. Catherine Grace Reynolds came into the world loudly announcing her presence, so different from my Eleanor's quiet arrival. Margaret is exhausted but radiant. Chen visited briefly at the hospital, the pain in his eyes unmistakable as he looked at this second child he cannot publicly claim. I find myself in the strange position of feeling compassion for this man who shares a connection with my wife. I will never have, yet who must watch from a distance as I raise his biological children. What a complex web we have woven in our attempt to create something stable and loving from circumstances that began in secrecy. What emerged from these private reflections was a portrait of a man of extraordinary character, one who had faced unusual challenges with grace, who had chosen love and commitment daily for decades, who had created family through intention rather than biology. Howard Reynolds had known exactly who I was from the moment of my conception, and had chosen me, chosen us, with full awareness and open heart. The revelation brought not anger at the deception, but a profound appreciation for the man who had been my father in all ways that mattered. His journals revealed not perfect decisions, but thoughtful, loving ones. Choices made within the context of a time when interracial families faced significant social challenges, when concepts of family formation were far more rigid than today. Dawn was breaking by the time I finished reading the journal from my birth year. Exhausted but strangely peaceful, I returned it to the drawer alongside the others, a chronicle of our family's unconventional journey seen through the eyes of the man who had provided its foundation. Later that morning, after a few hours of restless sleep, I made a decision. I reached for my phone and composed a text message to Dr. Chen. I would like to meet with you when you have time. There is much I'd like to learn about your perspective on our family story. His response arrived within minutes. I am available whenever works for you. Just name the time and place. Thank you for this opportunity, Eleanor. We arranged to meet that afternoon at Riverside Park, a neutral location that offered both privacy and the option to walk while talking, somehow easier than sitting face-to-face across a table with this man who was simultaneously familiar and a stranger. When I arrived, Dr. Chen was already there, seated on a bench overlooking the river, his posture straight but not rigid, a book open in his hands. As I approached, he looked up, closing the book and standing with a grace that suddenly seemed familiar, the same fluid economy of movement I had often observed in myself. Eleanor, he said, his expression a careful mixture of pleasure and restraint. Thank you for suggesting this meeting. Thank you for being available on such short notice, I replied, suddenly uncertain how to proceed despite having rehearsed this conversation in my mind throughout the morning. He gestured toward the walking path that followed the river's curve. Would you prefer to walk? Sometimes movement makes conversation easier. I nodded gratefully, and we fell into step beside each other, maintaining a respectful distance. The silence between us wasn't exactly comfortable, but neither was it hostile. Rather, it carried the weight of decades of unspoken truths. "I read my father's journals last night," I said finally. "Howard's journals. He documented everything, from when my mother told him about her pregnancy, through our entire childhood." Dr. Chen's expression revealed surprise. "I didn't know he kept journals." "Neither did I. They were in a locked drawer in his desk." I paused, gathering my thoughts. They helped me understand the complexity of the situation all of you were navigating. The journals painted a picture of three people trying to make the best decisions they could in difficult circumstances. He nodded, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. "Howard was an extraordinary man. When your mother told me about her pregnancy with you, I was terrified. Not of fatherhood itself, but of the implications for my position at the university, my visa status, and most importantly, the social consequences for a child of mixed race in a small town in the 1980s. And my mother? What was her initial reaction?" A small smile softened his features. "Margaret was always braver than I deserved. She was prepared to face single motherhood rather than terminate the pregnancy, though it would have meant significant social censure at that time. When Howard offered his solution, marriage, his name for the baby, a stable family structure, she initially refused out of concern for his future." "But he insisted," I said, recalling the journal entries. "Yes. Howard said he had loved Margaret since they were teenagers, and while the circumstances weren't what he had imagined, the opportunity to build a life with her and her child was one he wanted to embrace." Dr. Chen's voice carried unmistakable admiration. "I was both grateful and devastated. Grateful that you and your mother would have security and social acceptance. Devastated that I would not be able to openly claim you as my daughter." We walked in silence for several minutes, passing a family, with young children feeding ducks at the river's edge. I watched the father lift his toddler to see the birds better, the casual physical intimacy between parent and child suddenly poignant in light of our conversation. "What was the arrangement exactly?" I asked finally. "How did you remain in our lives without revealing the truth?" "Your parents, Margaret and Howard, suggested that as colleagues at the university, it would be natural for our families to socialize occasionally. Howard introduced me as a friend from the biology department, and I became the family friend who appeared at birthday parties, occasional dinners, some holiday gatherings. Always at the periphery, but present enough to witness your growth." I thought back to those gatherings, seeing them through this new lens. "You brought books every time you visited, science books mostly, but also stories about Chinese culture and history." He nodded, a flash of pleasure crossing his features. At the memory. "I wanted to share something of your heritage with you, in the limited way available to me. Your mother and Howard were generous in allowing those small connections. And financially? The trusts? The foundation? That began when you were born. I insisted on contributing to your future security, since I could not contribute daily. Presence. Howard initially resisted, viewing it as his responsibility as your legal father, but eventually agreed to an arrangement where I would provide funds through him and Margaret, maintaining the appearance that they were the source." He paused, then added softly, "It was a poor substitute for being your father, but it was something concrete I could offer." We had reached a bend in the river where a small wooden gazebo provided shelter and seating. By unspoken agreement, we entered it, each taking a bench, now facing each other directly. "Catherine is struggling more with this revelation than I am," I said after a moment. "I think because her relationship with Howard, with Dad, was different from mine. They shared certain qualities: charisma, expressiveness, social ease. Finding out he wasn't her biological father seems to have shaken her sense of self in a way that's particularly difficult." Dr. Chen nodded understanding. "Genetic heritage is a complex element of identity. Some find comfort in biological connections, others in chosen family bonds. Catherine may need more time to integrate these different aspects of her origin story. "Did you ever regret the arrangement?" I asked, the question that had been forming since reading my father's journals. "Watching someone else raise your biological children, limiting your own role to that of occasional visitor?" He considered the question carefully before answering. "Regret suggests I would have chosen differently given the same circumstances. I don't believe I would have, knowing the stability and love Howard provided for you and Catherine." He paused, emotion briefly overtaking his usual composure. "Did I experience grief? Profound grief, yes. There were moments, your first steps. First words, school achievements, when the limitations of my role were acutely painful. But grief for what cannot be is different from regret for choices made." The distinction struck me as both precise and profound, characteristic of the thoughtful man I was beginning to know beyond his role as my father's colleague and family friend. "What happens now?" I asked, the question encompassing the vast uncertainty of our newly acknowledged relationship. "That depends entirely on what you want, Eleanor," he replied. "I have imagined this conversation for 36 years, but always with the understanding that your comfort and well-being would determine its course. If you wish to know me better, I would be honored. If you prefer distance, I will respect that." Completely. His willingness to defer entirely to my preference moved me unexpectedly. This man, who had sacrificed open acknowledgement of his paternity for decades, was still placing my needs above his own understandable desire for connection. "I think," I said slowly, "that I would like to know you, not to replace the father who raised me, but to understand all the pieces of who I am and where I come from." The relief that crossed his features revealed how carefully he had been controlling his hopes. "That is more than I dared expect, Eleanor. Thank you. I have questions, though. Many questions." "Of course. I have answers, or at least my perspective, on whatever you wish to know. Tell me about your family in China. My grandparents I never knew existed." For the next 2 hours, we sat in that riverside gazebo as Dr. Chen, as Howard, shared the story of his origins. Born in Shanghai to university professors who had survived the Cultural Revolution through a combination of caution and good fortune. His early aptitude for science, nurtured despite limited resources. The extraordinary opportunity of a fellowship to study in America, arriving in 1983 as one of the first wave of Chinese scholars permitted to study abroad after diplomatic relations were normalized. He described my grandparents with vivid detail. My grandfather's passion for classical Chinese poetry, my grandmother's remarkable skill with traditional medicine and healing plants. Both had passed away without ever meeting their American granddaughters, though they had known of our existence through carefully coded letters and rare phone calls. They understood the complexity of the situation, he explained. In some ways, the concept of family arrangements made for social protection was not unfamiliar in Chinese culture, where extended family structures and practical considerations have long influenced family formation. As he spoke, I found myself searching his features for reflections of my own. The shape of his hands similar to mine, the same slight asymmetry in our smiles, the shared tendency to pause thoughtfully before answering difficult questions. These physical connections, previously unrecognized, now seemed obvious. "Do you have other family? Did you ever marry or have other children?" The question felt important. Were there half-siblings somewhere I had never known about? He shook his head. "No. There was a brief relationship some years after Catherine was born, but it didn't progress to marriage, and no other children." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Having experienced fatherhood from a distance, I couldn't imagine doing so again, and circumstances never aligned for a more traditional family structure." The implications of his answer settled heavily. This accomplished man had remained effectively alone, his emotional life shaped by the complicated arrangement that had defined our family. Whether this represented admirable devotion or unhealthy, attachment wasn't immediately clear, but the sacrifice was undeniable. As afternoon stretched toward evening, our conversation shifted from past to present. Dr. Chen, Howard, asked thoughtful questions about my life now, my work at the library, my home, my interests and aspirations. His genuine interest was evident in the attentive way he listened, connecting my current pursuits to stories or tendencies he had observed during my childhood. "You always loved organizing information," he noted with a smile. "Even as a small child, you would arrange your books by color, then by size, then by subject. Library science seems a natural extension of that inherent tendency." The observation, so specific yet so accurate, created an unexpected bridge between past and present, a continuity of identity that transcended the disrupted narrative of my origins. As shadows lengthened across the park, we finally stood to leave, both recognizing that this first real conversation had reached a natural conclusion while establishing a foundation for future interactions. "May I call you sometime?" he asked, his formal phrasing carrying an underlying vulnerability. "Perhaps we could have dinner next week if you're comfortable with that." "I'd like that," I replied, surprised by how genuinely I meant it. "And yes, please call. I have more questions, but I need time to process what I've learned today." We walked back toward the parking area in comfortable silence. At my car, I hesitated, uncertain about the appropriate farewell for this unprecedented situation. A handshake seemed absurdly formal, yet more familiar gestures felt premature. Howard Chen solved the dilemma with characteristic sensitivity, offering his hand first, but with a warmth that acknowledged the potential for a deeper connection in time. "Thank you, Eleanor, for your openness today. It means more than I can adequately express." "Thank you for your patience," I replied. "All these years and still now." Driving home to the house that was now legally mine, I felt a curious sense of expansion rather than the confusion I had anticipated. Learning about my biological father hadn't diminished the reality of the man who raised me. Instead, it had added dimensions to my understanding of family, identity, and love. Howard Reynolds had chosen fatherhood with full awareness of the biological realities. Howard Chen had sacrificed public recognition of his paternity to ensure my social acceptance and stability. Both men, in their different ways, had acted from love rather than obligation. The house looked different somehow when I pulled into the driveway, as if my new understanding had subtly altered the physical space. It was still the home where I had grown up, still filled with memories of Howard Reynolds as my father, but now it also contained the awareness of Howard Chen's indirect presence throughout those years. The books he had given me still on the shelves, the influence of his genes evident in my features when I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. That evening, Catherine called from Los Angeles, her voice carrying the slightly artificial brightness that suggested she was struggling more than she wanted to admit. "How are you doing with everything?" she asked after we had exchanged perfunctory updates about practical matters related to our parents' estate. "It's complicated," I admitted, curling up in our father's, in Howard Reynolds, favorite reading chair. "But not in the way I expected. I met with Dr. Chen today, Howard, and read Dad's journals from when I was born." "Dad kept journals?" The surprise in her voice mirrored my own earlier discovery. "Yes, detailed ones. They helped me understand how much love went into the decisions they all made, even if those decisions created a complicated situation." Catherine was quiet for a moment before responding. "I'm not ready for that yet. Meeting with him, I mean. It feels like betraying Dad somehow." "I understand," I said, and surprisingly I did. "There's no timeline for this, Catherine. You get to process it however works for you." Another silence then. "Have you thought about what you'll do with the house? Are you really going to keep it? It needs so much updating to be marketable. The shift to practical matters was characteristic of my sister's approach to emotional complexity, but I recognized the underlying question about stability and continuity in a time when so much had been disrupted. I'm keeping it, I confirmed. Not as an investment property, but as home. I'm going to make some updates gradually, but it's still where I want to be. And the lake house? Her tone carried a mixture of curiosity and calculation. Are you interested in sharing ownership? We could renovate it together, maybe use it as a vacation rental. The offer surprised me. Catherine had always been fiercely independent about financial matters, preferring clear separation to shared arrangements. This suggestion of collaboration represented a significant shift in her approach to our relationship. That could work, I said carefully. We should talk more about it when you're ready to visit again. I was thinking maybe next month, she replied. I have a break between projects and… She hesitated, then continued with uncharacteristic vulnerability. I think I need to spend more time in Millfield, processing everything. Maybe go through some of the family photos and papers together. I'd like that, I said, meaning it sincerely. The house is yours to stay in whenever you want to come back. After we ended the call, I sat in the growing darkness of the living room, surrounded by the physical evidence of the family life Howard and Margaret Reynolds had created. The truth about my biological parentage hadn't erased that reality. Rather, it had added layers of understanding about the extraordinary people who had shaped my existence, both directly and indirectly. What constituted family, I was beginning to realize, wasn't limited to biological connection or legal definition. Family was built through consistent presence, through showing up day after day with love and attention. Howard Reynolds had been my father in every way that mattered, not because biology dictated it, but because he had chosen that role with full awareness and complete commitment. At the same time, the genetic connection to Howard Chen represented a part of my identity worth exploring, not as a replacement for the father who had raised me, but as an addition to my understanding of myself. The qualities I had attributed to random chance or general inheritance, my aptitude for systematic thinking, my preference for careful analysis before action, now had context within a biological heritage I was just beginning to comprehend. As I finally rose to prepare for bed, I caught sight of a family photograph on the mantel. The four of us at my college graduation, smiling into the camera with genuine happiness. The image captured a moment of authentic family connection, regardless of the biological complexities beneath the surface. What mattered, I realized, wasn't the genetic instructions that had formed our physical bodies, but the love that had shaped our hearts and minds. Tomorrow would bring new questions, new adjustments to this expanded understanding of my origins. I would need to continue integrating these revelations into my sense of identity, navigating the complex emotions that accompanied such fundamental discoveries. But tonight, in the quiet of the house that had witnessed my entire childhood, I felt an unexpected peace. A growing certainty that expanding my definition of family to include Howard Chen didn't diminish Howard Reynolds' role in my life, but rather highlighted the extraordinary circle of love that had surrounded me from the beginning. Spring gave way to early summer as I settled into a new rhythm of life. The library's seasonal reading program kept me busy during work hours, while evenings and weekends were devoted to the gradual process of sorting through my parents' belongings. Deciding what to keep, what to give away, and what to store required both practical assessment and emotional processing, each object carrying memories and significance beyond its physical form. Catherine surprised me by returning to Millfield 3 weeks after her departure, arriving with less fanfare and more genuine presence than her previous visits. She had cleared her schedule for 10 days, she explained, to help with the house and to begin planning renovations for the lake property. I've been thinking, she said on her second morning, as we sorted through kitchen cabinets together, maybe the lake house could be something we share rather than my owning it exclusively. We both have connections to it, and it might be nice to have a place we maintain together. The suggestion revealed a shift in her approach to our relationship, from competition to collaboration, from division to connection. I agreed readily, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. Our work took on an unexpected quality of healing as we uncovered forgotten treasures. Photos from vacations we had taken as children, art projects our mother had carefully preserved, notebooks filled with our father's elegant handwriting. Each discovery prompted stories and shared memories, creating bridges between our separate experiences of the same family. "Do you remember this?" Catherine asked, holding up a clumsily constructed clay bowl painted in garish colors. "I made it in 4th grade art class. Mom used it to hold her keys and spare change for years, even though it was hideous." I smiled, taking the misshapen object carefully. She treasured everything we made. Remember the wall in her study? The Gallery of Accomplishments, she called it. Everything displayed with the same importance. My drama competition certificates next to your spelling bee trophies. Catherine's voice held a new awareness. They really did treat us with equal value, didn't they? Even though we were so different. This recognition that our parents had celebrated our distinctive strengths rather than comparing them seemed particularly meaningful in light of the biological revelations. Howard and Margaret Reynolds had created a family culture that honored individuality while maintaining connection, a balance I was beginning to appreciate more deeply through adult eyes. On the 4th day of Catherine's visit, Howard Chen joined us for dinner at my invitation. Catherine had agreed with trepidation, still uncertain about establishing a relationship with our biological father, but willing to take this initial step. I prepared my mother's recipe for pot roast, comfort food from our childhood that seemed appropriate for the emotionally complex evening ahead. The familiar aromas filled the kitchen as I worked, creating a sensory connection to countless family dinners shared around the table where we would now confront a new chapter in our understanding of family. Howard Chen arrived precisely on time, bearing 2 carefully wrapped packages and a bouquet of mixed flowers that showcased his attention to detail. No generic arrangement, but a thoughtful combination of blooms that complemented the season and setting. His expression as he entered revealed both eagerness and restraint, the careful balance he had maintained throughout our developing acquaintance. "Thank you for including me this evening," he said, offering the flowers with a slight bow that reflected his cultural heritage. "I brought something for each of you as well, if you're comfortable receiving them." Catherine's posture remained stiff as she accepted her package with a murmured thanks. My own curiosity overcame any hesitation as I unwrapped the gift he had selected for me. A beautifully bound edition of Chinese poetry in parallel translation, with both the original characters and English versions presented side by side. "My father, your grandfather, was devoted to these poems," Howard explained. "He copied them in traditional calligraphy every morning as a meditation practice. I thought you might appreciate this connection to your heritage." The thoughtfulness of the gift, acknowledging both my love of literature and my newly discovered ancestral connections, moved me deeply. "Thank you. This is something I'll treasure." Catherine opened her package with careful movements, revealing an antique jade bracelet nestled in silk. "This belonged to my mother, your grandmother," Howard explained. "In Chinese tradition, jade represents virtue, protection, and connection between generations. She would have wanted her granddaughter to have it." The tangible link to a grandmother she had never known seemed to affect Catherine profoundly. She ran her finger across the smooth stone surface without speaking, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. Dinner proceeded with initial awkwardness, gradually giving way to cautious conversation. Howard shared stories of his childhood in Shanghai, painting vivid pictures of a world far removed from our small-town American upbringing. Catherine, despite her initial reservation, found herself drawn into these narratives, particularly fascinated by his descriptions of traditional Chinese theater that had influenced his appreciation for performing arts. "Your interest in acting Makes perfect sense within your genetic heritage, he observed with gentle humor. My mother's family included several Beijing opera performers. The drive to embody different characters and communicate through physical and vocal expression appears to have traveled through generations. This context for a passion Catherine had always considered uniquely her own, separate from our bookish academic family culture, seemed to resonate deeply. She asked increasingly specific questions about these theatrical ancestors, her professional interest engaged despite her emotional hesitation. By dessert, my mother's apple crumble, another touchstone of family continuity, the conversation had achieved a remarkable balance. We acknowledged Howard Chen's biological connection to us without diminishing Howard Reynolds' foundational role in our development. The evening represented not replacement, but expansion, additional understanding, layered onto our existing family narrative. As we prepared to say goodnight, Catherine surprised us both by initiating a question she had clearly been considering throughout the evening. Did you ever regret it, the arrangement? Watching someone else be our father when biologically? She trailed off, unable to complete the painful inquiry. Howard considered her question with characteristic thoughtfulness. Regret is too simple a word for such a complex situation, he said finally. Did I experience profound grief at the limitations of my role in your lives? Absolutely. There were moments, school performances, graduations, everyday achievements, when watching from the periphery was acutely painful. But did I regret the arrangement itself? No. Because Howard Reynolds gave you stability, security, and unconditional love that I could not have provided under the circumstances of that time. He paused, ensuring his next words were precisely chosen. The measure of parenthood is not biological contribution but consistent presence and unwavering care. By that standard, Howard Reynolds was your true father. My role was to support that relationship while finding ways to remain connected to you both without disrupting the family structure that protected you. His words created a framework for understanding that honored all three parents' contributions to our lives, a perspective that respected the past while opening possibilities for our future relationships. As he left, Catherine extended her hand, in a gesture that, while not demonstrative, represented significant progress from her initial resistance. The following day brought unexpected resolution in the form of a letter Catherine discovered while helping me clear my father's study, a sealed envelope addressed to my daughters in his distinctive handwriting, dated just 3 months before the accident. Unlike the formal legal letter read by Mr. Harrington, this communication felt intensely personal, meant for our eyes only. We sat together on the window seat, our childhood reading nook, to open this final message from the man who had raised us. Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal and unfolded several pages covered in Howard Reynolds' elegant penmanship. My beloved Eleanor and Catherine, she read aloud, her voice catching. If you're reading this, you've learned the truth about our family's formation. Truth your mother and I debated sharing many times throughout your childhoods. Our decision to maintain the narrative of traditional biological parenthood while giving you a loving and stable home was made in a different era with different constraints than exist today. I moved closer to Catherine, our shoulders touching, as she continued reading. I want you to know that being your father has been the greatest privilege of my life. From the first moment I held each of you, biology became irrelevant compared to the profound connection of daily love and presence. You have been my daughters in every way that matters, regardless of genetic contribution. The letter continued, addressing potential questions about the arrangement, expressing hopes for our eventual understanding, and finally reaching a section that seemed particularly aimed at Catherine's struggles. Catherine, my bright star, I've always recognized myself in your expressive nature, your quick wit, your natural ability to command attention in any room. These qualities aren't determined solely by DNA, but by complex interactions of environment, relationship, and individual spirit. The connections between us transcend biological links. They were built through thousands of shared moments, conversations, conflicts, and reconciliations. Nothing about learning your genetic heritage changes the reality of our father-daughter bond unless you choose to diminish it. Tears streamed down Catherine's face as she read these words directly addressing her deepest fear, that the connection she had felt with our father might somehow be invalidated by biological reality. His explicit acknowledgement of their similarities, despite genetic differences, offered a perspective that science increasingly confirms, that nurture shapes us as powerfully as nature. The letter concluded with a passage for both of us. My greatest hope is that learning the complete truth about your origins will eventually expand rather than contract your understanding of family. Howard Chen made an extraordinary sacrifice in allowing me to raise his biological children. His consistent, if limited, presence in your lives represented remarkable strength of character. Should you choose to develop relationships with him, now, please know that doing so honors rather than betrays our family bond. Love is not a finite resource that diminishes when shared more widely. It expands to encompass new connections while preserving existing ones. You are, and will always be, my beloved daughters. The privilege of being your father has defined my life with meaning and joy beyond measure. Whatever you decide about, incorporating this new understanding into your identities, please remember that family is created through consistent love and presence, not merely through genetic instruction. With eternal love, Dad. Catherine carefully folded the letter when she finished reading, her composure temporarily abandoned as she processed this final communication. He knew, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. He knew exactly what I would struggle with, exactly what I would fear. He was your father, I replied simply. He understood you in ways only a parent who has been present for your entire life development could. This perspective, that Howard Reynolds's understanding of Catherine's specific emotional needs, represented the deepest evidence of their father-daughter connection, seemed to resolve something fundamental in her struggle. The bond they had shared wasn't invalidated by biological reality. Rather, it was validated by the intimate knowledge that comes only through years of attentive parenting. The remainder of Catherine's visit unfolded with remarkable healing. We divided our time between practical tasks, creating an inventory of the house contents, beginning plans for the lake property renovation, sorting through personal possessions, and deeper emotional work of integrating our expanded understanding of family. Howard Chen joined us twice more, once for an afternoon at the lake house where he helped assess renovation needs with his engineer's precision, and again for dinner at a local restaurant where his visible delight in sharing a meal with both his biological daughters created a poignant reminder of what he had sacrificed for decades. On her final evening before returning to Los Angeles, Catherine and I sat on the back porch watching fireflies emerge in the summer twilight. The comfortable silence between us represented significant evolution in our relationship, from competition to collaboration, from comparison to connection. I've been thinking about the inheritance situation, Catherine said eventually, her tone reflective rather than calculating. Dad was right in how he structured things. The house belongs here with you. You're the one who values Millfield, who has built a life here that connects to our family history, and the lake property makes more sense for me. A place I can visit, renovate according to my aesthetic, perhaps use as a creative retreat. Her recognition of the thoughtfulness behind our parents' decisions, seeing beyond dollar amounts to the symbolic meaning of each bequest, revealed her growing emotional maturity. The Catherine of 2 months ago would have focused exclusively on financial equivalence. This Catherine recognized the deeper values our parents had attempted to honor. And Howard, Dr. Chen, our biological father, she continued, testing these various designations as if searching for the right terminology. I'm still figuring out what kind of relationship makes sense there. It's complicated. There's no rule book for this, I offered. No right timeline or required level of connection. You get to define what works for you. She nodded, appreciating the absence of pressure. I'm thinking of inviting him to visit Los Angeles when he has time. He mentioned never having seen the Pacific Coast. Maybe showing him my world would be easier than trying to integrate him into my understanding of this one. She gestured toward the house behind us, the physical embodiment of our childhood, with Howard and Margaret Reynolds. The approach was characteristically Catherine, creating a fresh context rather than reworking established patterns, but it represented genuine openness to connection on terms that felt manageable to her. I think he'd like that very much, I said. After Catherine's departure, summer settled into a gentler rhythm. I continued the gradual process of making the house my own, while preserving its essential character as our family home. Some changes were practical, updating the kitchen appliances, renovating the main bathroom, while others were more symbolic, like converting my father's study into a reading room that honored his literary legacy while serving my current needs. Howard Chen and I established a weekly dinner routine, alternating between my home and restaurants in town. Each meeting expanded my understanding of this man whose genetic material had shaped my physical being, but whose influence on my development had been necessarily limited by complicated circumstances. I learned about my biological grandparents through his detailed stories and photographs. My grandmother's remarkable medical skills developed despite limited formal education, my grandfather's devoted practice of traditional calligraphy throughout Cultural Revolution restrictions. These ancestors, previously unknown to me, gradually became real through Howard's vivid descriptions, and the physical traits I now recognized had been transmitted through generations. Our developing relationship reached a significant milestone when Howard invited me to his home for the first time, an invitation he extended with characteristic care. Only if you would feel comfortable, he emphasized. I understand if it seems too intimate at this stage. His consideration reinforced what I had observed consistently, his extraordinary patience and respect for boundaries after decades of enforced distance. This capacity for deferred gratification, for accepting limited connection rather than demanding fuller acknowledgement, revealed remarkable character that I found increasingly admirable. Howard's home surprised me with its warm simplicity. Rather than the sterile academic environment I had half expected, his modest house revealed a rich inner life through carefully chosen objects, botanical illustrations reflecting his scientific interests, Chinese scrolls honoring his cultural heritage, and most tellingly, discreetly placed photographs of Catherine and me at various ages, clearly collected over years of peripheral presence in our lives. These were gifts from your mother, he explained, noticing my attention to a particular photo of my high school graduation. Margaret understood my need for some tangible connection, even when full relationship wasn't possible. This evidence of my mother's compassion, recognizing Howard Chen's emotional needs while maintaining the family structure she had built with Howard Reynolds, added another dimension to my understanding of their complex arrangement. All three adults had navigated an unprecedented situation with remarkable consideration for each other's well-being, alongside their primary concern for Catherine and me. By mid-July, I had established sufficient comfort in my transformed understanding of family to invite both Howard Chen and James Anderson, my longtime friend and Millfield's police chief, to dinner at the house. The evening represented a meaningful integration, bringing together my biological father and a friend who had known me throughout my life with Howard Reynolds, creating bridges between past and present, between biology and chosen connection. James, who had been patiently supportive throughout my process of discovery and adjustment, approached the evening with characteristic straightforwardness. His easy conversation with Howard Chen, finding common ground in shared interests, despite their different backgrounds, created a comfortable atmosphere that allowed natural interaction rather than forced formality. Your father, Howard Reynolds, would be pleased, I think, James said quietly as we cleared dishes together, while Howard Chen examined a book from the living room shelves. Not because he'd want to be replaced, but because he'd want you to have every possible connection that adds meaning to your life. The observation, coming from someone who had known Howard Reynolds well through decades of community interaction, offered valuable perspective from outside our immediate family situation. James had witnessed my father's parenting approach throughout my childhood and adolescence, had observed his consistent prioritization of my well-being above his own comfort or convenience. "I think you're right," I agreed. His letter made it clear that he saw expanded family connections as addition rather than replacement. This framework, addition rather than replacement, had become increasingly central to my understanding of our evolving family constellation. Howard Chen's biological connection didn't diminish Howard Reynolds' fundamental role as the father, who had raised me. Rather, it added dimension and context to my understanding of myself and my origins. As summer progressed toward autumn, Catherine surprised me with increasingly frequent communication from Los Angeles. Our text exchanges evolved from practical matters related to the estate to more personal sharing, updates about her career opportunities, questions about family history she was reconsidering through our new understanding, even occasional reflections on emotional processing that would have been unimaginable in our previous sibling dynamic. "I had lunch with Howard when he visited for a conference last week," she texted in early September. "Showed him around my neighborhood, introduced him to a few friends. It was strange, but not as uncomfortable as I expected. He's unfailingly considerate about boundaries." This tentative connection, initiated on Catherine's terms, proceeding at her pace, represented significant progress from her initial resistance that the thoughtfulness she had once reserved exclusively for strategic career advancement now extended to navigating complex family relationships with increasing maturity. My own professional life gained unexpected dimension through Howard Chen's academic connections. When the university library needed a consultant for reorganizing their scientific journals collection, his recommendation opened an opportunity to expand my professional expertise beyond Millfield's public library system. This collaboration, based on mutual respect for our different knowledge domains, created yet another bridge between my established life and my newly discovered heritage. By early October, 6 months after my parents' accident and the subsequent revelations about our family origins, I found myself experiencing not just acceptance, but genuine appreciation for the complex circumstances that had shaped our lives. The three adults who had contributed to our formation, Margaret and Howard Reynolds as our daily parents, Howard Chen as our biological father and peripheral presence, had navigated unprecedented circumstances with remarkable commitment to our well-being. This appreciation crystallized during an unexpected encounter at the community center's Autumn Festival, an annual tradition my mother had helped establish decades earlier. I had volunteered to coordinate the book exchange booth, continuing her legacy of literacy promotion throughout Millfield. Howard Chen had offered to assist, his gentle efficiency making the complex logistics flow smoothly. As we arranged donated books on outdoor tables beneath trees beginning to show fall colors, a longtime community member approached, Mrs. Abernathy, who had known our family since before my birth. Her expression registered momentary confusion at seeing Howard Chen and me working together with such comfortable familiarity. "Eleanor, dear," she said, clearly trying to place this relationship within her understanding of our family. "Dr. Chen has always been such a good friend to your parents." The comment presented a choice: maintain the established narrative or acknowledge the more complex reality. After a brief hesitation, I opted for simple honesty. Yes, he was an extraordinary friend to our family, and, as we've recently learned, he's also my biological father. Mrs. Abernathy's eyes widened briefly before her expression settled into thoughtful understanding. "Well," she said finally, "that explains certain things I always wondered about." She turned to Howard with remarkable adaptability. "Your daughters are a credit to all three of their parents, Dr. Chen. Margaret and Howard raised them beautifully, but anyone with eyes could see something of you and Eleanor especially." Her matter-of-fact acceptance, neither scandalized by the revelation nor overly dramatic about its significance, represented the best of small-town community at its most evolved. This acknowledgement of complex family formation without judgment or excessive curiosity suggested that our parents' fears about social acceptance, while valid in their time, might have eventually been navigable within this community of long-established relationships. As Mrs. Abernathy moved on to examine the book selection, Howard stood momentarily speechless, visibly moved by this casual public acknowledgement of his connection to me. "That is the first time," he said quietly, "in 36 years, that anyone has openly referred to you as my daughter in a social setting." The significance of this milestone, this small moment of public recognition after decades of careful discretion, affected us both deeply. For Howard, it represented belated acknowledgement of a fundamental relationship long kept in peripheral vision. For me, it offered integration of separate aspects of identity into a more complete understanding of self and family. That evening, sitting on my back porch watching the sunset paint the autumn sky in vivid colors, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months. The devastating loss of my parents had initiated a cascade of revelations that had fundamentally transformed my understanding of family, identity, and love. What had initially seemed like a narrative of deception had revealed itself as a story of extraordinary commitment. 3 adults navigating impossible circumstances with remarkable consideration for each other and primary concern for the children, whose well-being depended on their choices. Howard Reynolds had embraced children not biologically his own with unwavering devotion. Margaret Reynolds had maintained connections that allowed all parties some measure of relationship within necessary boundaries. Howard Chen had accepted painful limitations on his paternal role to ensure our stability and social acceptance. Most remarkably, these complicated arrangements had produced not dysfunction, but rather 2 daughters who, despite our differences, had developed into accomplished women with the capacity to eventually understand and appreciate the complex circumstances of our origins. Catherine's evolving career in Los Angeles, my own established life in Millfield, both represented successful outcomes of the unconventional family structure that had shaped us. As twilight deepened into evening, I recognized that what had initially felt like a disruption of identity had actually created completion. The addition of previously missing pieces that allowed fuller understanding of myself and my place in the world. The legacy of both my fathers, Howard Reynolds through daily presence and guidance, Howard Chen through genetic inheritance and careful peripheral support, had combined to shape who I had become. Family, I now understood, transcended simple, biological or legal definitions. It was created through the accumulated impact of daily choices, consistent presence, and unwavering commitment. My expanded understanding of my own origins hadn't diminished established bonds, but rather had added dimensions of connection that enriched my sense of identity and belonging. The inheritance that truly mattered wasn't the house or financial provisions, but rather the extraordinary example set by 3 people who had prioritized love and stability above conventional definitions or personal satisfaction. Their choices, however imperfect or shaped by the limitations of their time, had created a foundation of security from which Catherine and I had been able to build our adult lives. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, I felt profound gratitude for all 3 of my parents. For the mother whose love had embraced complexity rather than simplicity, for the father whose daily presence had shaped my character and values, and for the biological father whose patient waiting had finally been rewarded with acknowledged connection. Their collective legacy wasn't measured in property or financial security, but in the capacity for love, understanding, and resilience they had cultivated in their daughters. This, I realized, was the true inheritance, not what had been left to us, but what had been built within us through years of consistent care, deliberate guidance, and unwavering commitment. And unlike material possessions that diminish when divided, this inheritance only grew stronger when shared between both Howard Reynolds' daughters and Howard Chen's daughters. the same two women viewed through different lenses of family connection, each perspective adding depth and meaning to our understanding of who we were and where we belonged. As autumn deepened, bringing vibrant color to Millfield's tree-lined streets, I found a comfortable rhythm in my expanded understanding of family. Weekly dinners with Howard Chen had evolved from cautious exploration to genuine connection, each conversation adding layers to my knowledge of both his life story and the heritage we shared. Our biological connection, once shocking in its revelation, had become an integrated aspect of my identity, not replacing the father who had raised me, but adding dimension to my understanding of self. The Margaret Reynolds Literary Foundation, established through Howard Chen's generous endowment, had moved from concept to reality with remarkable efficiency. As co-directors, Catherine and I had worked with the university to establish criteria for scholarships supporting library science students from diverse backgrounds. The Foundation's first board meeting, held in early October, had brought together community leaders, university administrators, and both Catherine and Howard Chen via video conference from Los Angeles. "Your mother would be proud," Mr. Harrington commented after the meeting concluded. "This foundation embodies her lifelong commitment to literacy and education while creating opportunities she never had." The observation captured something essential about the legacy our parents had created, not just through their professional accomplishments or financial provisions, but through values transmitted across generations. My mother's passion for making literature accessible to everyone, regardless of background or circumstance, now continued through institutional support that would outlast any individual lifetime. As Halloween approached, Catherine surprised me with news of another visit to Millfield. "I need to check on the lake house renovations," she explained during our weekly phone call, "and I'd like to be there for the Foundation's first scholarship announcement. Also," she added with uncharacteristic hesitation, "I've been thinking about Thanksgiving." The holiday's approach had been weighing on my mind as well. Our first major family celebration without our parents loomed as both logistical challenge and emotional milestone. Catherine's acknowledgement of its significance suggested her growing willingness to engage with difficult emotions rather than deflecting through practicality or performance. "What are you thinking?" I asked, careful to maintain neutrality rather than directing her considerations. "Maybe we could host it at the house," she suggested, not trying to replicate exactly what Mom and Dad would have done, but creating something new that still honors traditions. "We could invite Aunt Margaret and Uncle Philip, maybe a few close friends, and—" She paused before adding, "Howard, if you're comfortable with that." The suggestion, particularly Catherine's initiative in including our biological father, represented remarkable evolution in her approach to our reconfigured family understanding. Just 6 months earlier, she had barely been able to acknowledge Howard Chen's existence without resentment. Now she was proposing his inclusion in what had always been our most intimate family gathering. "I think that would be lovely," I replied, careful not to overemphasize the significance of her suggestion. The house has always been meant for gathering family, however we define it. Catherine arrived the following week with uncharacteristic simplicity, driving herself rather than arranging elaborate transportation, bringing just one modest suitcase rather than the excessive luggage that had previously characterized her visits. Her appearance, while still polished, lacked the performative quality that had often created distance between us. "The house looks good," she observed as we carried her bag inside. "You've made some changes without erasing what makes it home." The comment acknowledged my careful balance of preservation and adaptation, updating essential systems and refreshing tired decor while maintaining the character of spaces that held decades of family memories. Like our approach to incorporating Howard Chen into our lives, the renovations represented addition rather than replacement, honoring history while accommodating present needs. We spent her first evening reviewing plans for the lake house renovation, which had proceeded more systematically than I would have expected from my typically impulsive sister. The architect's drawings revealed thoughtful preservation of the cabin's rustic character, while modernizing infrastructure and creating more functional spaces. I'm thinking of it as a creative retreat, Catherine explained, showing me renderings of a converted boathouse reimagined as a small performance and rehearsal space, a place where I can work on scripts and possibly host workshops for emerging actors, something that serves a purpose beyond just vacation property. This consideration of purpose and contribution represented significant evolution in Catherine's approach to the inheritance. Rather than viewing the property purely as a personal asset or status symbol, she was considering its potential for meaningful creative engagement, a shift that aligned with our parents' values of using resources for growth and community benefit. The Margaret Reynolds Literary Foundation's first scholarship announcement, scheduled for that weekend, had generated considerable community interest. The local newspaper had requested an interview, which Catherine and I decided to conduct together, presenting a united front despite our different connections to Millfield. "How does it feel to honor your mother's legacy through educational support?" the reporter asked, her recorder placed carefully between us in the library's small conference room. Catherine, who had always been more comfortable with media attention, answered first. "Our mother believed that education creates possibilities that transcend circumstances. This foundation extends that belief into practical support for students who might otherwise lack access to advanced education in library science." I added my perspective. Margaret Reynolds understood that libraries aren't just repositories for books, but community spaces where everyone deserves equal access to information and opportunity. These scholarships continue that democratic vision while acknowledging the importance of diverse perspectives in shaping library services. The reporter nodded appreciatively before addressing the more personally challenging aspect of our story. "And how has learning about your biological father affected your approach to this foundation?" Dr. Chen is listed as the primary financial contributor. The question, while professionally relevant, probed the complex personal journey we had navigated over recent months. Catherine and I exchanged glances, silently negotiating who would address this more sensitive territory. "Our family story is more complicated than we initially understood," I said carefully. "But the foundation reflects the values and commitments of all three parents who contributed to our lives. Margaret and Howard Reynolds through daily guidance, and Howard Chen through both biological connection and supportive presence. The foundation honors that complete heritage rather than privileging any single aspect." Catherine nodded agreement. "We're fortunate to have had parents, all three of them, who prioritized education, community service, and creating opportunity for others. The foundation represents their collective legacy rather than belonging to any individual." Our unified response, acknowledging complexity while emphasizing shared values, seemed to satisfy the reporter. The resulting article, published the following day, presented a thoughtful exploration of both the foundation's mission and the uncommon family circumstances that had shaped it. The scholarship announcement ceremony itself, held in the university, library's main reading room, brought together the various strands of our expanding family narrative. Howard Chen attended in person, his quiet pride evident as Catherine and I presented the first awards to three deserving students: a single mother returning to education after raising her children, a first-generation college student from the rural outskirts of the county, and a young man who had discovered library science after volunteering with literacy programs for recent immigrants. These inaugural scholars represent the diverse perspectives essential to evolving library services for changing communities, I explained during my portion of the presentation. Each brings unique life experiences that will inform their approach to information access and community engagement. Catherine added her perspective with surprising eloquence. "Our mother believed that stories connect us across differences of experience and background. These scholarships ensure that those who preserve and share stories represent the full spectrum of human experience." Howard Chen, invited to speak briefly as the foundation's primary benefactor, addressed the gathering with characteristic thoughtfulness. Margaret Reynolds showed me the transformative power of literature when I arrived in this country as a young scientist with limited English fluency. Her patience and guidance opened worlds beyond my scientific training. This foundation honors her belief that everyone deserves access to the expanded horizons that literacy and literature provide. The ceremony concluded with a reception where the three of us, Catherine, Howard Chen, and I, stood together greeting community members who had supported the Foundation's establishment. This public acknowledgement of our connection, unimaginable just months earlier, represented remarkable evolution in our understanding of family as a concept that transcends conventional definitions. Later that evening, as Catherine and I prepared dinner in our family kitchen, she surprised me with an observation that revealed her developing perspective. "It's strange," she said, chopping vegetables with uncharacteristic domestic comfort. "But I'm starting to see Howard, Dr. Chen, as an addition rather than a complication. Getting to know him doesn't diminish Dad's role. It just adds another dimension to understanding where we come from. This framework, addition rather than complication, articulated precisely the perspective I had been developing through my own relationship with Howard Chen." "That's exactly it," I agreed. "Nothing about connecting with him erases or replaces what Dad gave us. If anything, it highlights how extraordinary it was that Howard Reynolds chose us so completely when biology didn't require it." Catherine nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I've been reading about chosen family versus biological connection. So much research suggests that consistent presence and emotional attunement matter more than genetic links in healthy development. Dad gave us that daily presence while Howard contributed genetically and supported from a distance. Both roles matter, just differently." This nuanced understanding of complementary parental contributions represented significant evolution from Catherine's initial either-or framing of these relationships. Her capacity to acknowledge the value of both men's roles in our formation demonstrated emotional maturity beyond what I would have expected 6 months earlier. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.